The sun had just set over New York City, casting long shadows across the skyline. Inside the modern glass and steel tower that was Thomson Enterprises, the office lights flickered to life. The city was waking up, and so was Alexander Thomson, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech conglomerates in the world. At 32, Alexander had already achieved everything a man could dream of: wealth, power, recognition. His empire was worth billions, and his face appeared on every major business magazine. He had built it all from the ground up, starting as a college dropout with nothing but a vision. Now he was on top, admired by many and feared by even more. But despite his success, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that had followed him for years. The people around him, his colleagues, his investors, treated him with respect, but none of them truly understood him. None of them ever cared about the person behind the wealth. The only person who had ever made him feel truly seen was Olivia Parker. Olivia had come into his life at a charity gala, one of those events where the rich and powerful mingled, networking in between clinks of champagne glasses. Alexander had always been the center of attention at these events, but that night he noticed her immediately. She wasn't like the other women vying for his attention. Olivia didn't seem impressed by his wealth, his status, or his connections. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her intelligence, her wit, and the way she carried herself that truly captivated him. She was warm, confident, and unafraid to speak her mind. And for the first time in years, Alexander found himself intrigued. They spent the evening talking about everything from business to philosophy to art. Her laugh was like music, and her eyes, clear and vibrant, held a world of depth. Alexander knew right then that he couldn't let her slip away, and he didn't. Over the next few months, their relationship blossomed. What began as an affair of attraction soon grew into something deeper. For Alexander, Olivia was more than just a beautiful woman. She challenged him, pushed him to think differently, to explore new ideas. She made him feel human again. For Olivia, Alexander was everything she had dreamed of: ambitious, driven, and most importantly, powerful. She admired his work ethic and vision. But unlike Alexander, who had grown up with nothing, Olivia came from a background that taught her the importance of securing her future. She didn't believe in fairy tale romance. She saw Alexander as a means to an end. His wealth, his connections, his influence, these were things that could make her dreams come true. Olivia had no intention of letting a man like him slip away, and she knew exactly how to make him fall for her. They fell in love, or so it seemed. To Alexander, Olivia was the one person he could rely on, the one person who made him feel like he was more than just his success. But to Olivia, Alexander was an opportunity, a stepping stone to a bigger and more secure future. As time passed, cracks began to form in their seemingly perfect relationship. Alexander, absorbed by his work, began to prioritize his company over everything else. His late nights at the office became more frequent. He promised Olivia he'd change, that he'd make more time for her, but the promises were always broken. Olivia, on the other hand, began pushing for more. She wanted more than just a relationship with Alexander. She wanted a future with him, one that included a piece of his fortune. Her subtle hints turned into demands. She wanted him to invest in her projects, to give her access to the connections she had always desired. Alexander, blind to her growing ambition, continued to indulge her, thinking that he was just making her happy. Everything changed when Alexander made a huge mistake. He trusted Olivia with his empire. He had been working on a major business deal, a merger that could have propelled his company into the international spotlight. Olivia, seeing an opportunity, convinced him to invest a large portion of his assets into one of her projects. She promised it would be lucrative, something that would benefit them both, but the truth was, Olivia had no intention of using the money for any legitimate project. She had been planning to siphon off the funds into a private account, a backup plan for when things went south. Months later, Alexander discovered the truth. His company was on the brink of collapse. The funds he had invested in Olivia's supposed project were gone, and so was the money. The merger fell through. His company began to hemorrhage money, and soon Alexander was left with nothing but a shattered empire. When he confronted Olivia, she feigned shock, then quickly turned defensive. "I never asked you to do this, Alexander. This is your fault. You didn't listen to me when I needed you. You were always so busy with your work." The words stung, but the betrayal hurt more. Olivia had used his love and trust to get what she wanted. And when things went wrong, she abandoned him. The aftermath was devastating. Alexander lost everything. His company collapsed, his wealth was gone, and his reputation was tarnished. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was the realization that the woman he loved had used him. Olivia left him without a second thought. She had gotten everything she wanted from him and moved on to the next opportunity. Alexander, heartbroken and financially ruined, was left to pick up the pieces of his life. He wandered aimlessly for weeks, unsure of what to do next. The world that had once been his to conquer was now a distant memory. The man who had everything now had nothing. The news hit Alexander harder than he could have ever anticipated. The cold reality of the betrayal Olivia had committed settled in like a dark cloud. His company, once a thriving empire, was now crumbling under the weight of financial losses, failed deals, and mismanagement. The investors who had trusted him now pulled out, and his reputation was in tatters. In the weeks following Olivia's departure, Alexander found himself sinking into despair. His apartment, once filled with the hum of work, the sound of ringing phones, and constant meetings, was now eerily quiet. The only noise was the soft hum of the city below. He hadn't left the penthouse for days, too ashamed to face the world. His father's words echoed in his mind. "You've let me down, son. The family's legacy is at risk." His mind couldn't stop racing. How could he have been so blind? How could he have let Olivia, someone he thought loved him, manipulate him so easily? The anger was there, but it was overwhelmed by the overwhelming sadness of losing everything. Worse yet, he had lost himself in the process. The worst part was that he couldn't even blame anyone but himself. He had spent years building his empire, but in doing so, he had neglected the people around him, including the one person who had truly shown him love. He had chosen his career, his ambition, and in the end, those choices had cost him everything. One afternoon, as Alexander sat alone at his desk, sifting through the mountain of paperwork, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Melly Carter, an old acquaintance from his early days in business. They had crossed paths a few times at industry events, but they had never truly connected. Emily had always been known for her sharp mind and expertise in finance, but she had never been one of the power players in Alexander's circle. But when Alexander's phone rang again, and he saw her name pop up on the screen, he knew he needed something, anything, to get out of the rut he was in. "Hello." Alexander answered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Alexander, it's Emily. I heard about what happened with the company. I know this isn't the best time, but I wanted to offer my help. I've been following your progress for years, and I believe you can turn this around. But you need someone who can help you with the financial side of things. Someone who understands the intricacies of rebuilding from scratch." Alexander hesitated. He was used to people offering help, but this was different. Emily was offering something more tangible. She wasn't just sympathizing with him, she was offering solutions. She was the first person to reach out to him who wasn't trying to take advantage of him. "I don't know if I can fix this," he said softly, the weight of defeat still in his voice. "I've lost everything, Emily. My company, my reputation. I don't even know where to start." "You start with yourself, Alexander," Emily said, her voice steady and reassuring. "I believe in you. You're more than just your company. Let me help you find a way to rebuild not just your empire, but your life. You don't have to do this alone." For the first time in weeks, Alexander felt a spark of hope. Emily's words, her calm, unwavering belief in him, made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. Over the next few months, Emily and Alexander worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been lost. Emily, with her sharp financial expertise, helped him untangle the mess that Olivia had left behind. She took charge of reorganizing his finances, restructuring his assets, and most importantly, helping him regain control of his life. At first, the task seemed insurmountable, but Emily's calm presence and strategic thinking gave Alexander the strength he needed to keep going. She never asked for anything in return, never expected anything from him, except for his commitment to the process. And that, Alexander realized, was more than he had ever received from anyone else. With Emily's help, Alexander began to feel like he was starting from scratch. But this time, he had learned the valuable lesson of humility. He wasn't the same arrogant, power-hungry man who had once been consumed by his ambition. He had been broken, but now he was ready to rebuild, not just his empire, but his life. Months passed, and Alexander found himself becoming a different person. He spent less time buried in his office, and more time focusing on his personal well-being. He started working out again, taking time to enjoy the small things in life, things he had neglected for years. He spent more time with his family, reconnecting with people who had always supported him. As the months passed, the business began to recover. Slowly but surely, Alexander regained his footing, thanks to Emily's unwavering support and guidance. The company wasn't where it once had been, but it was on its way to recovery. And for the first time in a long time, Alexander felt proud, not just of the business, but of himself. During this time, something unexpected happened, something that Alexander had never anticipated. As he and Emily spent more time together, working side by side, they grew closer. It wasn't just about business anymore. There was an undeniable connection between them. Emily's calm intelligence and kind-hearted nature brought out the best in Alexander, and for the first time, he realized that he didn't just value her as a business partner, he respected her as a person. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily stayed late to go over some documents with him. They were alone in the office, the dim light of the desk lamp casting a warm glow over the room. "You've done it, Alexander," Emily said, her voice soft but proud. "You've built something amazing here, and you've done it with integrity." Alexander looked at her, feeling something stir in his chest. For so long, he had felt broken, as though his life had no meaning beyond his wealth and success. But in that moment, he realized that he had found something more meaningful, something real. "Thank you," Emily, he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you. Emily smiled, but there was a quiet understanding in her eyes. She had never expected anything in return from him, but she knew, deep down, that this journey had brought them closer than either of them had ever anticipated. As the weeks went by, Alexander's business slowly began to recover. Thanks to Emily's sharp financial expertise and her unwavering belief in him, the empire he had nearly lost was coming back to life. But as the work progressed, something else was beginning to shift. The once cold, professional relationship between Alexander and Emily was gradually evolving into something more personal. It started with small gestures, a lingering glance, a casual touch during meetings, the late-night work sessions that became more about the shared moments than the numbers on the page. Alexander found himself looking forward to seeing her every day, his thoughts often drifting to her long after the workday had ended. For Emily, the lines were beginning to blur as well. She had always admired Alexander's resilience, but over the past few months, she had begun to see a different side of him. The man who had once been consumed by ambition was now showing a deeper vulnerability. He was no longer the cold, calculating businessman, but a man who had learned humility and self-awareness. However, Emily was still cautious. She had always been independent, and she was acutely aware of the power dynamics at play. She didn't want to fall for someone like Alexander, again, not someone who could so easily be swept away by ambition and personal goals. But she couldn't deny the attraction that was building between them. Every time she saw him smile, her heart fluttered in a way it hadn't in a long time. One evening, after a particularly intense meeting with investors, Alexander and Emily decided to grab a drink to unwind. They went to a quiet bar near the office, a place where they could talk without the weight of business looming over them. As they sat at a small table, Alexander took a deep breath, his eyes searching Emily's face as if he was trying to figure out something that had been on his mind for weeks. You know, I don't think I've ever properly thanked you, he said, his voice low and sincere. I don't just mean for the work you've done to help me rebuild my business. I mean for being here, for believing in me when no one else did. Emily smiled, taking a sip of her drink. You don't need to thank me, Alexander. I just did what I thought was right. And I think you're doing the right thing now. You've worked so hard to get to this point. There was a pause, a heavy silence between them. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze, and it made her stomach flip. I don't just want you to believe in my business. Emily, Alexander continued, his voice more vulnerable than it had ever been. I want you to believe in me, in who I am now, and I want you to know that everything I've done, everything I've worked for, it's all for us, for a future together. Emily froze. The words hung in the air between them like a thick fog, and she felt a strange mixture of fear and longing. She had known there was something between them, something that had been building ever since they started working together. But hearing him say those words out loud brought it all to the surface. Alexander, Emily said quietly, her voice shaking slightly, I'm not sure if I'm ready for this. I've spent so much time focusing on rebuilding my life and my career that I'm not sure I can let someone else in. I've been hurt before, and I don't want to go down that road again. I get it, Alexander said softly, his expression earnest. I'm not asking you to rush into anything. I just need you to know how I feel. I need you to know that this is real for me. There was a brief silence, and for a moment, Emily wasn't sure what to say. She looked into his eyes, and in that moment, she saw the man he had become, the man who wasn't just the cold billionaire, CEO, but someone who had learned the true meaning of vulnerability and love. I don't know if I'm ready either, but... Emily paused, her breath catching in her throat. I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see where this goes. But you have to promise me something, Alexander. You have to promise that no matter what happens, you'll always put yourself first. I don't want to be the reason you lose yourself again. Alexander smiled softly, his heart swelling with emotion. I promise you, Emily. I've learned my lesson. This time, I'm doing it for us. For the right reasons. Over the next few weeks, the connection between Emily and Alexander deepened. They continued to work closely together, but now there was an undeniable chemistry between them. It wasn't just about business anymore. They were starting to build a friendship, a partnership. They spent time together outside of work, going for walks in the park, having dinner at small, quiet restaurants. There was no rush, no pressure. They were taking their time, learning more about each other, and allowing the relationship to grow naturally. However, despite their growing closeness, both of them still had their doubts. Alexander was still wary of being too vulnerable, too open. He had been burned by love before, and he wasn't sure if he could trust again. Emily, too, remained cautious. She had seen how quickly things could spiral out of control when emotions became too tangled with ambition and success. But each day, as they shared more moments together, the fear began to fade. The walls they had built around themselves started to crumble, piece by piece. They knew they couldn't undo the past, but they were both willing to take the risk and build a future together. As the months passed, Alexander and Emily continued to grow closer, but the pressure of their pasts still weighed heavily on them both. While Alexander had learned to open up and trust again, he was still haunted by the betrayals of his previous relationships, particularly Olivia's manipulation. He couldn't shake the fear that he might be making the same mistakes again, especially with someone like Emily, someone who had been so kind and patient with him. Emily, too, found herself grappling with her own doubts. While her feelings for Alexander had deepened, she still carried the scars of her past. She had built a successful career on her own, and she wasn't sure if she could risk her heart again. She didn't want to be just another person in Alexander's life that he could turn to when it was convenient. She needed to be sure that he truly saw her not as a business partner, but as someone he valued for who she was. Despite these inner conflicts, the attraction between them was undeniable. Every shared glance, every quiet moment, every touch spoke volumes about how deeply they cared for each other. But both of them knew that love wasn't just about passion, it was about trust, understanding, and commitment. One evening, after a long day of meetings and work, Alexander invited Emily to a private dinner at a secluded restaurant, a place where they could talk freely without distractions. He had been thinking a lot about their relationship lately, and he knew that something needed to change. As they sat down to dinner, Alexander looked at Emily with a seriousness that made her heart race. "Emily, I've been thinking a lot about us," he began. "About everything we've been through, everything we've built together. And I've realized something." Emily looked at him, sensing the gravity in his voice. "What is it?" she asked, her tone soft. "I've been holding back," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been afraid to fully let go, to trust in us, because I'm scared of losing you. I've been burned before, and I know I've made mistakes. But I don't want to make the same mistakes again." Emily's heart swelled with compassion, but there was a part of her that remained cautious. "Alexander, you don't have to be afraid of losing me," she said gently. "I'm not going anywhere. But you have to understand that this relationship can't just be about rebuilding your empire. It has to be about Usabao, who we are together, without the pressure of everything else. Alexander nodded slowly, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, and I'm ready. I'm ready to put everything I have into this. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose us. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. It was the moment she had been waiting for when Alexander finally saw her, not just as a business partner, but as someone he could truly build a life with. But there was still one more obstacle standing between them: the business. A few days later, Alexander received an unexpected phone call from one of his old business associates, Samuel Langley. Samuel was a shrewd investor who had been involved with Thompson Enterprises for years, and he was calling to discuss a potential new venture. I've been watching your company's progress, Alexander, Samuel said, his voice smooth and confident, and I think it's time for us to make a big move. There's a major acquisition on the table, and I think it could be the next big thing for you. But I need you to come to the meeting tomorrow, and I need you to be ready to make a decision. Alexander felt a surge of stress. He had promised Emily that he would prioritize their relationship, but this acquisition could be a game changer. It would require his full attention, and the pressure of the decision weighed heavily on him. If he agreed to this deal, it could bring his company back to the top. But it also meant more time away from Emily, more sacrifices, and more of the same old cycle of ambition that had hurt his relationships in the past. When he brought it up to Emily that night, she could see the tension in his face. You're not happy about it, are you? She asked, sensing his internal conflict. I don't know what to do, Alexander admitted, running a hand through his hair. This deal could be huge, but I promised you that I would focus on us, that I wouldn't let business take over my life again. I don't want to make the same mistakes, but I don't know how to balance it all. Emily's expression softened. She understood the weight of the decision, but she also knew what was at stake. I don't want you to lose yourself in your work, Alexander, but you've worked hard to get to this point. You can't abandon everything just to please me. I want you to succeed, but I also want us to find a balance. We can't have everything be about business and nothing about us. Alexander nodded, taking in her words. He was torn, feeling like he was being pulled in two different directions. On one hand, he had the chance to secure his future and the future of his company. On the other, he had the chance to build something more meaningful, something that wasn't based on success or wealth, but on love and partnership. The next morning, as he walked into the boardroom, Alexander's mind was still spinning. Samuel and a group of investors were already seated at the table, and the weight of the decision hung in the air as he sat down. Alexander took a deep breath and looked at the faces around him. He could feel the pressure of the business world closing in on him, but something else tugged at his heart, his promise to Emily, to himself, and to the life he wanted to build with her. I've made my decision, he said, his voice steady. I'm not going to pursue this acquisition. I've realized that I've been living my life for everyone else, my father, my business, the investors, but I can't keep doing that. I need to live for me. For Emily, I'm stepping away from this deal. The room fell silent, but Alexander felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had made the right choice. He had chosen love over ambition. After Alexander's bold decision to reject the acquisition deal, he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. The tension he had carried for weeks seemed to dissipate, and the pressure of living up to everyone's expectations finally faded. He had made a choice for himself, one that would change the course of his future. But the aftermath of that choice was not without its challenges. Despite the relief he felt, Alexander now had to face the consequences of stepping away from the business world's fast-paced, high-pressure environment. His decision meant not only disappointing some investors, but also risking the future of Thompson Enterprises, the company he had worked tirelessly to build. While Emily had been supportive, Alexander knew that the road to redemption was not going to be easy. As the days passed, Alexander's confidence in his decision grew. But he knew that rebuilding his company without relying on old patterns of ambition was going to be difficult. He had to find new ways to lead, new ways to navigate the business world without falling back into the trap of sacrificing his personal life. Emily, who had always been the steady force in his life, continued to stand by him. She helped him restructure the company's priorities, focusing on sustainable growth and authentic relationships with his employees and clients rather than just profits. Her calm demeanor and sharp mind became invaluable to Alexander, and he began to realize just how much he needed her, not just as a business partner, but as someone who understood him at his core. One afternoon, as they sat in his office, Emily turned to him with a gentle smile. "You know, you've already taken the hardest step. It's not about the money anymore, Alexander. It's about building something that lasts. Something that you can be proud of, no matter the size." Alexander smiled back, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You make it sound so easy. But I'm still unsure, Emily. What if I'm making the wrong choice?" Emily leaned forward, her voice steady and reassuring. "You've already made the right choice. You've chosen a future that's meaningful. Trust in that." For the first time in a long while, Alexander felt truly supported. He didn't have to prove himself to anyone anymore. He could build a future with Emily, one based on values, not just success and power. However, despite the encouragement and progress they made, challenges were inevitable. A few weeks after Alexander's decision, they encountered a major setback. A large competitor, Mason Enterprises, noticed the shift in Thompson Enterprises and saw an opportunity to swoop in. Mason began to acquire smaller companies, setting its sights on Thompson Enterprises as a prime target. The pressure mounted once again. Alexander's instincts as a businessman were telling him to act, to fight back. But this time, he was different. He didn't want to rely on manipulation, aggressive tactics, or the old strategies that had worked for him in the past. He was determined to approach this challenge differently. "Emily, we can't let this company fall into the hands of Mason," Alexander said one night, frustration evident in his voice. "We need to act fast." Emily met his gaze with a calmness that always centered him. "We don't need to fight fire with fire, Alexander. We need to stay true to our values. Our employees, our clients, those are the people who believe in us. If we keep focusing on what matters, we'll find a way through this." Alexander looked at her, torn. He wanted to fight, to protect what he had worked for, but Emily's words resonated with him. He had spent too long letting ambition dictate his decisions. This time, he would fight for his company, but he would do it on his own terms, together. Emily and Alexander crafted a strategy that was radically different from anything Alexander had ever done before. They decided to focus on building deeper relationships with their clients, offering more personalized services and building community outreach programs that gave back to society. It wasn't about the quick wins or aggressive moves anymore. It was about creating something sustainable, but the road was still difficult. Alexander faced scrutiny from investors, and competitors continued to circle around, waiting for any sign of weakness. The challenge wasn't just financial, it was emotional. Every decision, every move they made together was about restoring trust in the company and in each other. As they continued working on the new strategy, Alexander realized that this journey had become more than just about business. It was about proving to himself that he could live a life that was true to his values. He wanted to leave a legacy, not of wealth and power, but of integrity and compassion. One night, after a particularly long and challenging day, Alexander sat on the rooftop of his penthouse, gazing at the city below. Emily joined him, her presence always a calming force. They stood there in silence for a while, watching the lights flicker in the distance. "I've been thinking," Alexander said, his voice quiet, "about everything I've been through. About losing Olivia, about losing myself, and how I almost let ambition take everything from me. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to keep fighting for something that doesn't matter." Emily turned to him, her expression soft. "You've already changed, Alexander. You've taken the hardest steps, and look at what you're building, now something that matters." Alexander smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emily. You've made me believe in something bigger than myself. You've made me believe in us." Emily reached out and took his hand. "We've only just begun, and for the first time in a long time." Alexander knew that the journey ahead wasn't just about rebuilding his business, it was about building a life, a future, and a love that was strong enough to withstand anything. The company was slowly but steadily recovering. With Emily's guidance, Alexander had managed to refocus his business efforts, steering the company away from the aggressive practices that once defined it and into a more sustainable and ethical approach. Clients had begun to return, and the internal culture of Thompson Enterprises had improved drastically. Alexander was beginning to see a future that wasn't just about money, but about creating something meaningful. Yet, the road to redemption was not without its obstacles. As the company grew, so did the expectations both from investors and from Alexander himself. The more he worked, the more he found himself falling into old habits. Late nights at the office, constant meetings, and endless calls began to pull him away from Emily. Despite their progress, there were still moments of doubt, especially from Emily. She had seen Alexander pour everything into his work before, and she couldn't help but wonder if he would fall into the same trap again. One evening, after a particularly demanding day, Alexander found himself staring at the city lights from his office window, trying to catch his breath. He had missed another dinner with Emily, and he knew that she was getting frustrated. He had promised her that things would be different, that he wouldn't prioritize work over their relationship. Yet, here he was again, consumed by the pressures of his business. His phone buzzed on the desk, and he saw a message from Emily. "We need to talk." He knew what that meant. That night, Emily arrived at his penthouse, her face a mixture of concern and frustration. The tension in the air was palpable as she stood in front of him, arms crossed, waiting for him to speak. "I know what you're going to say," Alexander began, his voice tired. "I've been working late again, and I know I promised I'd make more time for us. But Emily, you have to understand, this is what I have to do. My company needs me." Emily's eyes softened, but there was a firmness in her voice. "I understand the pressure you're under, Alexander. I do, but I've been here before. I've seen how you get consumed by work, how it pulls you away from everything else, and I won't stand by and watch you do this again. I'm not doing that." Alexander shot back, frustration building in his chest. "I'm trying, Emily. I'm really trying to balance everything. But this company is my legacy. I can't just walk away from it." Emily took a deep breath, her expression softening. "I'm not asking you to walk away from your company, Alexander. I'm asking you to choose. Choose me, choose us. You can't keep putting your entire life into one thing. It's not sustainable, and it's not fair to either of us." The silence that followed was heavy. Alexander looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been so focused on rebuilding his empire that he had neglected the very thing that had brought him back to life in the first place, his relationship with Emily. The next day, Alexander found himself in the office again, surrounded by the chaos of business. But this time, something was different. He had made a choice that he had been avoiding for months. The weight of Emily's words lingered in his mind, and he realized that he couldn't keep juggling both without sacrificing one for the other. He called Emily into his office, his decision clear. When she arrived, he looked up at her with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're right. I've been consumed by work, and I've put everything else on hold. But that ends now." Emily's eyes widened slightly, surprised by his words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been blind to what really matters," he said, standing up from his desk. "I've spent so long chasing success that I forgot what it means to have a real, meaningful life. I don't want to make that mistake anymore. I choose us, Emily. I choose you." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she stepped closer to him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had always believed in Alexander, but hearing him say those words, seeing him finally acknowledge the importance of their relationship, was everything she had hoped for in the days that followed. Alexander made drastic changes to his lifestyle. He started setting boundaries, taking fewer meetings, and dedicating more time to Emily and the company's new direction. The change wasn't instantaneous, but the commitment was real. Emily, too, had to adjust. She had spent so much time protecting herself, keeping her guard up against the possibility of disappointment, that it took time for her to fully trust Alexander again. But with each day, she saw the sincerity in his actions, and slowly, the walls she had built began to come down. They continued to work together, but now there was a balance between business and personal life. They celebrated small victories both in their relationship and in their careers. The company was growing steadily, and Alexander was finally feeling like he could breathe again. However, just when things seemed to be going perfectly, a new challenge arose. One of Alexander's largest investors, Richard Mason, began pressuring him to take the company in a direction that went against everything Alexander had worked for. Mason was focused solely on profit, willing to sacrifice ethics and long-term sustainability for quick returns. This was the ultimate test for Alexander. He knew that he could push through with Mason's demands and see his company's value skyrocket in the short term. But at what cost? Would he be betraying everything he had learned in the process of rebuilding? Would he be betraying Emily? Days turned into weeks, and the pressure continued to mount. The decision from Richard Mason, their largest investor, was looming over Alexander's head like a dark cloud. Mason had made it clear that he wanted Alexander to push the company towards aggressive short-term gains, focusing on cost-cutting and maximizing profits at the expense of sustainability and ethical business practices. Alexander knew that accepting Mason's demands would make the company richer, but it would come at a cost to everything he had worked for. Emily was supportive, but worried. She had seen how hard Alexander had worked to rebuild his life, and now, just when things were starting to fall into place, he was being forced to choose between his integrity and the future of his company. But deep down, she knew that no amount of money or success could ever replace the values that had brought them together. That night, Alexander sat in his penthouse, staring at the pile of documents from the board meeting earlier that day. The deal with Mason loomed in the corner of his mind, a tempting promise of more wealth and success. But something inside him resisted. He had already been down that path before, the path where he sacrificed everything for success, and he had paid the price. He thought about Emily and the promise he had made to her. She had trusted him to make the right decisions, to prioritize their relationship and the future they were building together. And yet, here he was, standing at the edge of a decision that could destroy everything he had learned. The phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Emily. "We need to talk." Alexander took a deep breath. He knew what this meant. They had been avoiding this conversation for weeks, the one about Mason and the future of the company, the one about the choices he had to make. He quickly dialed her number, his fingers trembling slightly. "Emily," he said when she picked up. "I know we need to talk. I'll be waiting for you." An hour later, Emily arrived at his penthouse, her face serious. She could tell by the look in his eyes that something was weighing heavily on him. "You're thinking about the deal, aren't you?" Emily asked softly, sitting down across from him. Alexander nodded, his gaze distant. "I don't know what to do, Emily. If I don't take this deal, we might lose everything. The company will suffer. But if I do take it, I'll be sacrificing everything we've built. Everything you've helped me rebuild." Emily leaned forward, her expression calm but resolute. "Alexander, you know what's important. I'm not asking you to give up the company. I'm asking you to remember why you started in the first place, to remember the values that made you the man you are. Success at the cost of everything else is empty. You've worked so hard to rebuild yourself, your career, and our relationship. Don't let that go for the sake of a quick win." Alexander's heart was heavy, torn between the man he used to be and the man he had become with Emily's help. He had fought so hard to get to this point, to prove that he was more than just his wealth and ambition. But now, faced with Mason's offer, he was forced to confront the possibility that he might revert to the same path he had walked before. The path of greed and neglect. Emily's voice broke through his internal struggle. "Whatever you decide, Alexander, I need you to make this choice for yourself, not for anyone else. You've built something real, here's something that matters. Don't destroy that." Alexander stood up, pacing the room. He looked at Emily, the woman who had stood by him through everything, who had helped him rebuild both his company and his heart. Her words resonated deeply within him. He couldn't go back to the man he had been. He couldn't let his ambition define him anymore. With a deep breath, he turned to her and said, "You're right. I've been so caught up in trying to prove myself to the world, but I've forgotten what really matters. I've forgotten what I promised to you." The next day, Alexander called a meeting with Mason and the rest of the board. He had made his decision, and he wasn't going to back down. "Mason, I've made my decision," Alexander said, his voice steady. "I'm not going to pursue this deal. I'm not going to sacrifice my values for short-term profit. This company is going to move forward based on integrity, trust, and sustainable growth." Mason's face reddened with frustration. "You're making a huge mistake, Alexander. You could be on top again, leading the biggest corporation in the world. Don't throw it all away for a moral stance. Alexander stood firm, his resolve unwavering. I've already been on top, and it cost me everything. I'm not going to make that mistake again. I've learned that success doesn't mean anything if you lose yourself in the process. Mason's angry response didn't faze Alexander. He knew he had made the right choice, the only choice he could live with. The days following the meeting with Mason were filled with tension. The board was not happy with Alexander's decision, and some investors threatened to pull their funds from the company. But Alexander stood by his decision. Knowing that he had done the right thing, he had decided that he would rather rebuild from scratch than lose himself in the pursuit of power and money. Emily was there by his side, supporting him every step of the way. She had believed in him from the beginning, and now she saw the man he had become, a man who had chosen integrity over greed, love over ambition. Months later, the company began to thrive once again. But this time, it was different. They had built a sustainable business model that prioritized ethics, trust, and genuine connections with clients and employees. Alexander had not only regained his financial footing, but had also learned what it meant to lead with compassion and integrity. And with Emily by his side, Alexander knew that the future was bright. Together, they had proven that love, trust, and the courage to choose what was right were the foundations of lasting success. With the company back on track, Alexander and Emily began to settle into a new rhythm. The pressure from the investors had lessened, and the public perception of Thomson Enterprises was shifting. No longer was the company seen as a ruthless corporation driven by ambition. It was now a company that valued its people, its employees, and the communities it served. But even as things at work stabilized, there was still one challenge, that neither Alexander nor Emily could fully escape their own relationship. Emily had been there for Alexander during his lowest points, and Alexander had learned to trust her in ways he hadn't trusted anyone else. But despite their growing bond, Emily couldn't shake the lingering doubts about their future together. She had spent so much of her life focused on her own career and independence that the idea of fully opening her heart to someone else was terrifying. She had seen how quickly life could change, how easy it was for everything to fall apart. She had learned to guard her heart, and even though she loved Alexander, she couldn't ignore the fear that came with being vulnerable again. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Alexander and Emily took a walk through the park near his apartment. The night was calm, and the city lights flickered in the distance, casting a soft glow on the path ahead. "Emily, I know things aren't perfect," Alexander began, his voice serious. "I know I've made mistakes. I'm not the same man I was before, but I'm still not perfect. I don't expect you to be okay with everything overnight, but I just want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to make this right." Emily turned to him, her eyes softening. "I know, Alexander. I see how much you've changed, how hard you've worked. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough. Can we really leave the past behind? Can we really build something solid without the shadows of what happened before haunting us?" Alexander stopped walking, looking down at her with a mixture of vulnerability and determination. "We can, Emily. I believe we can. But only if we're both willing to make the commitment to each other. I don't want to keep living in the past, and I don't want to lose you again." Emily paused, her thoughts swirling. She had seen Alexander's transformation, but was that enough? Could she trust him again, or would their past continue to haunt their future? "I don't know if I can promise you that," Emily said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. I've built my life around myself, Alexander. I've learned to depend on no one but me, and I'm scared that if I open up to you, I'll lose myself again. The following days were filled with tension as both of them struggled to find common ground. Emily wanted to believe in their love, in the future they could build, but the walls she had built around herself were hard to tear down. Alexander, on the other hand, was determined to prove that he was ready to move forward. But he knew that healing wasn't something that could be rushed. He had spent years chasing success at the expense of everything else: his family, his relationships, his happiness. Now, he was learning the true meaning of balance. But as the days passed, Emily's uncertainty began to take a toll on him. He wanted to be the man she needed, but he couldn't help but wonder if they were both trapped in the past, unable to move forward. The turning point came when Emily, feeling overwhelmed by her own doubts, decided to take some time away. She needed space to clear her mind and figure out what she truly wanted. Alexander respected her decision, though it broke his heart to see her go. He knew that they both needed time to heal, but he also knew that they couldn't continue on separate paths forever. A week later, after spending time reflecting on her own life and her feelings for Alexander, Emily returned to his penthouse. She had spent the days apart processing everything: her fears, her doubts, and the love she still felt for him. As she stood in front of Alexander, her heart racing, she realized that she had been running from something she truly wanted: a future with him. "I've been thinking," Emily said, her voice steady but soft, "and I've realized that I can't keep living in fear of losing myself. I've spent so long protecting my heart that I forgot what it felt like to truly love and be loved. You've changed, Alexander, and I have, too. I don't want to run from this anymore." Alexander's heart soared, but the weight of her words hit him. He had known that rebuilding their trust would take time, but hearing her say that she was ready to move forward with him meant everything. "I'm not asking you to forget the past, Emily," Alexander said, taking her hand in his, "but I want to build a future with you, a future where we both have everything we need, without losing ourselves in the process." Emily smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I want that too, Alexander. I want to build something real, something that lasts. But we have to promise each other that we'll never lose sight of what really matters." With Emily's decision to move forward with him, Alexander felt as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. They both knew that their journey was far from over, but for the first time, they felt certain that they could face the future together. As they sat together, watching the sunset over the city, Alexander leaned in and kissed her softly on the lips. It wasn't just a kiss of passion, it was a kiss of promise. A promise that they would no longer let the past define their future, that they would build something new and beautiful together. In that moment, everything felt right. Alexander and Emily had faced their doubts, their fears, and their pasts, and they had come out stronger on the other side. Together, they were ready for whatever the future held. As time passed, Alexander and Emily's relationship grew stronger. The foundation they had built together seemed unshakable. Their company was thriving, moving forward with a sustainable model that reflected their values. Things between them were finally moving in the right direction, and they both felt as if they had found balance not just in their work, but in their personal lives as well. But life, as it often does, threw another challenge their way. One morning, Alexander received a call from a renowned investor, Richard Mason, the same man who had once tried to push Alexander into making unethical deals in the past. Mason had come back with an offer that was too good to ignore, one that could elevate Thompson Enterprises to the global stage. "Alexander, I'm willing to offer you a deal that will make your company the leader in the industry. You'll have access to resources that will push you to the very top. Think about if this is your chance to secure the future of Thompson Enterprises for generations to come. You can't afford to turn it down." Alexander listened to Mason's offer carefully, but as he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that this deal, like the others in the past, might come with strings attached. The temptation was there, the promise of success, the allure of power, but with Emily's face in his mind. Alexander couldn't just jump at the offer without considering the bigger picture. He knew what Mason was asking of him. It wasn't just a financial deal. It was a test of his values, of everything he had worked to rebuild. Would he go back to his old ways, or would he continue on the path he had chosen with Emily? Later that night, as Emily and Alexander sat down for dinner, the weight of the decision was clear on Alexander's face. She could see the conflict in his eyes. The allure of success and wealth was calling him again, and she knew he was tempted. "What's wrong, Alexander?" Emily asked, her voice filled with concern. "You've been distant lately." Alexander took a deep breath and placed his fork down. "I've received an offer, Emily, a big one. Mason, he's offering me a deal that could take our company to new heights. It's a game changer." Emily didn't say anything at first, but the silence between them was heavy. She knew what this meant. She knew that Mason's offer wasn't just about the company, was about everything they had fought to build together. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Emily asked, her voice steady but with a hint of sadness. "I don't know," Alexander admitted. "I'm torn. I've worked so hard to get us here, and this deal could secure everything for the future. But I don't want to lose sight of what we've built, what we've become." Emily stood up from the table, her expression unreadable. She walked over to the window and looked out at the city below. "I don't want to lose you again, Alexander. I don't want to go back to the way things were. We've come so far, together. But I can't live in fear of losing you to your ambition again. I need to know you'll choose us, no matter what." The words cut through Alexander like a blade. He had promised her that things would be different, that their relationship would come first. But now, as Mason's offer loomed large, he felt himself slipping back into the mindset of ambition and success that had always dominated his life. "I don't want to hurt you again." "Emily," Alexander said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "I want to make the right choice, but I feel like if I don't take this opportunity, I might lose everything again. My legacy, the company, everything I've worked for." Emily turned to face him, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "If you choose the company over us again, Alexander, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I can't be with someone who prioritizes everything else over our future. You have to choose. Do you want a legacy or do you want love? Can you have both?" For the next few days, Alexander wrestled with the decision. He couldn't sleep, his mind constantly racing. Emily was right, he had promised her that this time things would be different. But the allure of the deal, the power and recognition that came with it, was so tempting. He had worked his whole life to reach this point, and now, the very thing that had once consumed him was offering him everything he thought he wanted. But, as he thought about his past, about Olivia, about the mistakes he had made, he realized that this wasn't the future he wanted. He had learned that success without love, without meaningful relationships, wasn't true success at all. In the end, it wasn't the money or the power that mattered. It was the life he had rebuilt with Emily. The love they shared was more valuable than any deal could ever be. One afternoon, Alexander called Mason to decline the offer. "I've thought about it, and I'm not taking the deal," he said, his voice firm. "I've made my choice. I'm not going to sacrifice the things that really matter to me." Mason's voice on the other end of the line was cold, but Alexander wasn't swayed. He had made the right decision. He wasn't going to lose Emily again. He wasn't going to let ambition take over his life once more. That evening, Alexander came home to find Emily sitting on the couch, her eyes red from the tears she had shed earlier. When he walked in, he didn't need to say anything. He simply sat next to her, took her hand, and held her close. "I chose you," he whispered, his voice full of emotion. "I chose us. No more regrets. No more looking back. I'm not going to lose you again, Emily." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would choose us. I knew you'd do the right thing." Alexander smiled softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "We're in this together, Emily, always." And in that moment, they both knew that their love was stronger than anything the world could throw at them. They had built something real, something lasting, and nothing, not even the allure of power or money, could take that away. The weeks following Alexander's decision to decline Mason's offer were filled with relief and quiet determination. Though there were still challenges, ahead investors who questioned his choices, competitors who saw an opportunity to overtake his company, Alexander knew he had made the right decision. He was no longer the man driven by greed and ambition. He was the man who valued love, integrity, and long-term happiness. Emily stood by his side through it all, offering her unwavering support. She never questioned his decision, knowing that this was the moment when Alexander had truly transformed. Their relationship, once marked by hesitation and doubt, had blossomed into something stronger than either of them had ever imagined. They were not just business partners. They were partners in life, navigating the challenges together, side by side. As Alexander's business continued to recover and grow, Emily's role became more crucial. Together, they built a company that not only valued profits, but also placed importance on the well-being of its employees and the community. They were creating a legacy, not just in business, but in how they chose to live their lives with integrity, love, and respect for one another. One evening, after another successful board meeting, Alexander took Emily to a small, intimate restaurant, the same one they had visited when they first began rebuilding their relationship. The place had become special to them, a symbol of the new life they were building together. As they sat down to dinner, the ambience was warm, and the sound of soft music filled the air. The world outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. "Emily," Alexander began, his voice soft, "I've spent so many years chasing success, believing that power and wealth would make me whole. But I've realized now that the only thing that truly matters is the love and the life we're building together." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "We've come so far, haven't we?" "We have," Alexander replied, taking her hand in his. "And we're just getting started." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands intertwined, knowing that everything they had worked for, everything they had endured, had led them to this point. Together, they had found something more meaningful than success, something real. As the evening drew to a close, Alexander stood up and walked around the table to where Emily sat. He knelt down in front of her, his heart racing with emotion. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I've spent my life looking for success, for power, but it wasn't until I met you that I realized the true meaning of happiness. You've shown me that love, trust, and integrity are what truly make life worth living. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, not just as business partners, but as partners in everything." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, overwhelmed by his words. She had always believed in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. She had seen the change in him, and now he was offering her everything she had ever wanted. "I love you, Emily," Alexander said, his voice full of sincerity. "Will you marry me?" Without hesitation, Emily whispered, "Yes, yes, Alexander, I will." In the months that followed, Alexander and Emily's relationship flourished. They continued to work together, but their lives were no longer solely about business. They made time for each other, taking vacations, spending weekends together, and creating memories that had nothing to do with success or wealth. They learned to love each other without the pressures of their past, and together they built a life that was rich in love. Not just money. Their wedding was simple but beautiful, a reflection of the life they had chosen to build, one grounded in love, respect, and shared values. Surrounded by close friends and family, Alexander and Emily vowed to support each other through every challenge, to grow together, and to never lose sight of what truly mattered. Years later, Alexander stood in the lobby of Thomson Enterprises, now a thriving company that had become a model of ethical business practices. He looked around at the employees who had helped him rebuild, each one a part of the legacy he and Emily had created. But the true legacy wasn't just the business, it was the love they had for each other, and the way they had chosen to live their lives. As Emily walked up beside him, her hand slipping into his, Alexander smiled. Together, they had created something that would last: a business, a family, and a love that had withstood every trial. "We did it." "Emily," Alexander said softly. "We did," she replied, her eyes sparkling with pride. "And we'll keep doing it together."